The current crisis is the greatest collective challenge we've faced since the beginning of the EU. Now, first of all, it's a health challenge, but it's also an unprecedented economic and social crisis. Now, beyond the economic shock, it's divergent impact in each country and in each sector that makes it so difficult to get to grips with. The pandemic is the cause of the crisis, but the extent of the crisis is linked in to a number of different factors. Factors like the interdependence of our economies. It's not only the countries that have been severely affected by the crisis, like Italy, Spain or France, that have suffered economically. No. It's also countries that depend on tourism, countries with weaker capital markets, or countries where industry is very much dependent on European and international value chains. And there are some countries where labour markets are in a more difficult state and where some sectors like mobility, automotive and textile are dominant. These countries are suffering as well. Now, to the asymmetric impact of the crisis, we have to add a number of other issues, like divergent capacities of member states to support their economies. So if we don't act in a determined fashion, we are going to see significant divergence when it comes to kickstarting the economies. We're going to see distortions in the single market, and we're going to see social inequalities. So the EU cannot permit this. In order to create growth and jobs in our union, we need a single market that works, and we need to ensure convergence between member states. That's why a European approach is so important.
The Commission's proposal, which I have just presented to the members of the European Parliament. This response is meant to deal with the present crisis whilst preparing the future. A future that reinforces the European Union as a whole and each and every member state. Indeed, the current crisis is also an opportunity. You know the emphasis that my Commission has put on the green and digital transition. And these transitions are even more important for the future. And at the same time, we must ensure that the transition to a climate-neutral economy leaves nobody behind. Next Generation EU will therefore multiply the funding for the Just Transition Fund. And the crisis has also taught us that the importance of strengthening resilience in all its dimensions, for example, the health, the social, the economic. Achieving all this can only be done by raising our game to a completely new level, by being bold and extremely focused at the same time. The aim must be to invest together in our common good. We will be bold by raising unprecedented amounts of funding at European level. We will be focused by channeling the funding to the new priorities that will shape the future. And to achieve this, we're setting up Next Generation EU worth €750 billion. Together with the core MFF of €1.1 trillion, this sums up to €1.85 trillion in today's proposal. We will use the bulk of this money to help member states recover from the crisis and build up their long-term resilience capacity. Und der Schwerpunkt wird daher auf
The focus will be on investment and reform, and it will be embedded in the European semester. The focus will be focused on our priorities, that is the European Green Deal and digitalisation. There will be a special programme with the cohesion funds in order to try and compensate for the direct harm caused to member states. but we will try and help healthy businesses to survive the crisis, because not all of them have access to liquidity, and not all of them are able to depend on a very strong home market to obtain liquidity. One lesson from the crisis is that there is an important industrial value chain which we have to strengthen. Next Generation EU will give that project a fillip. On top of that, the crisis has shown that throughout Europe, we have to make improvements to the health system. It's not just a question of the capacity, but also the quality and the resilience. A new programme will help us in that. Now, these are times where everyone, I think, has understood how important it is that first-rate research institutes must stay in Europe with excellent scientists, and we will therefore give a boost to Horizon Europe so that we can act internationally and together if we are to keep this global crisis under control. That is why we will provide support to our friends in the Western Balkans and our neighbours in Africa and partners throughout the world.
In our response to this crisis, because our citizens and businesses have acute and urgent needs. But we must do it in such a way that we prepare for the future. And this is why, thanks to the focus of Next Generation EU and together with a baseline MFF, 60%, so more than half, of our investments will go to modern policies over the next 7 years. Moreover, in preparing the future, we must also pay attention to the current difficult financial and budgetary situation of many member states. Therefore, the funding will be raised through loans, many of which will have very long-term maturities and will be paid back thanks to new own resources through the next European budget. These new own resources would be levied, for example, through the emission trading system, through a new carbon board adjustment mechanism, a levy on big companies that benefit most from the single market, on single-use plastic, and through a digital tax based on OECD work. This would allow member states to contribute to the next European budget at the same level they currently do. Allow me to stress that Next Generation EU will in any case be strictly time-limited and as extraordinary as the current crisis. The proposal is on the table. It stems from intense work by the Commission and numerous contacts with my counterparts in the Member States and the other European institutions. We need to reach an agreement between the European Council and the European Parliament as soon as possible to allow time for the necessary national ratifications. Moreover, I hear the calls for action even before the end of this year. I understand and I support these calls. And this is why we are also proposing an immediate reinforcement of the current MFF and 2020 budget to top up cohesion spending, bring forward recapitalisation support and funding for external action, in particular for the Western Balkans. I will work without rest with my colleagues in the European Council and the European Parliament to come to an agreement as quickly as possible on all these proposals. We are at a defining moment for the European Union, but I'm confident. The past weeks have shown that there is a growing awareness of the need to invest together in the European common good, and to do this by laying the foundations for the well-being of Europe's next generation. And I always think where there is a will, there is a way. Thank you.